Hi, and welcome to the Hotline, your online hotline direct line to the women only attorneys at Hofheimer Family Law. My name is Katie Carter, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm an attorney at Hofheimer Family Law, a Virginia based family law firm that represents women exclusively in divorce, custody, and child support cases. And I'm here today to talk to my friend and colleague, Lorna Rhoades, about an exciting update to the Virginia law. Lorna, if you could just kick us off and explain what the changes to the law are going to be effective on July 1st of 2026 and what you think of these changes. Basically, do you think this is a good or a bad change for Virginia?
Yes. Hi, Katie. I'm happy to talk about this. So, in Virginia, there's two types of divorces. There's a divorce from the bond of matrimony, and then there's this concept called a divorce from bed and board. A divorce from bed and board is archaic and it's not used very often. The new law addresses just a divorce from bed and board, but I do think it's going to have impact on Virginia families who are proceeding through divorce. So, what this new law says is that you do not have to have a fault ground or a waiting period to file a divorce from bed and board. There's no waiting period, and you do not need a fault ground to file a divorce from bed and board. And this will impact families. It will not impact a divorce from the bond of matrimony, which is when you are legally declared divorced and strangers to one another. A divorce from bed and board is more of divorce that is a legal separation. But what this law does in this change now says for people that the court can be opened to people without a mandatory waiting period and without fault. So we can get the court's involvement pretty much immediately under this new law, while before, in order to get the court's help in a particular situation, we needed to allege a fault ground and or we had to have met the mandatory waiting period of 1 year. And I think this will have practical implications for families. So, for example, if we need pendente lite relief, which is a temporary order from the court, we'll be able to get that much quicker and much easier. So we could, for example, file for a divorce from bed and board, no waiting period, no fault grounds, and we could ask the court for a temporary order of spousal support. We can ask the court for an order requiring the parties to live in separate residences. We could ask the court for an order preventing dissipation of assets. And so being able to do that is going to be easier under this new law.
Yeah, before, I mean, I think it's really hard for people to understand if you haven't been through the process before. If you weren't gonna allege fault-based grounds, then you had to wait for a full year before you could file with the court, before you could have a pendente lite hearing, before you could do anything. And we were finding that those waiting periods were really creating kind of toxic situations for parties who were, especially parties living separate under the same roof, which is something that probably the majority of divorcing or separating couples are doing just because financially they don't have so many things resolved. But being able to file a divorce from bed and board, and like when I've been talking about this, I've been saying like divorce, because you won't actually be divorced just because you're filing, just because you get into court, just because you have a temporary support hearing to kind of temporarily establish some of the big issues like support, custody and visitation, the things that are really making life extra difficult. But just being able to get into court without waiting a year is going to give people much more access to potential relief and hopefully mitigate some of the more traumatic kind of side effects of divorce and people locked in this kind of stalemate for a period of a year or more until they can get into court if they aren't able to negotiate an agreement, or if they either don't have fault-based grounds or don't want to use them, or are facing all sorts of resistance from the other side because of what they're alleging. There's all sorts of things that can come up in those kinds of cases, but this is sort of giving people more direct access to the court in real time. Lorna, what kind of issues, like at this stage, is the court going to be able to hear and act on, like in the early stages of separation? What exactly can we expect the court to decide?
Well, I think the court can rule on temporary issues. So, for example, like we've talked about in a toxic home environment when you're living under the same roof, if there's any way for you to financially separate into different homes, the court could fashion a remedy for the couple so that they can live in different locations. um, as opposed to having to wait a year and being stuck in the same house and having a toxic relationship during that time, which is also dangerous. The
Mhm.
court could make a ruling also at this initial stage that says neither party is going to deplete assets or run up credit of the other party. And so
Mhm.
that is a protection to the people going through divorce because without a court order, individuals are able to do things that could ultimately hurt the final resolution of the case. A savings account could be drained out, there could be debt racked up in your name. But once there's a court order, you have a little bit more protection, protecting you from that type of bad behavior.
Mhm.
The court can step in and do a temporary custody and visitation order, as opposed to there being nothing in place and then there being issues where children aren't brought back on time or there is no schedule, which can really be unstable for the children and also the parents. Another thing that we can do when we file for a divorce, whether it's after the 1-year waiting period and we're just filing for a divorce from the bond of matrimony, or under this new law for filing right upon separation, saying we want a divorce from bed and board, we're able to get access to this process called discovery. And so if the other side has the accounts in just their name, and isn't willingly disclosing financial information, the discovery process through litigation allows us access to that. And that can be really helpful in moving the divorce along because it's hard to negotiate anything if you don't know what's out there and what the information is financially. The discovery process helps us get that information, and having that done sooner in the case can be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Another cost saving thing I think I see from this new law is that when we have to allege fault in our initial pleadings, that takes time and money. We need to get details, we need to get marital history from you. And not that we don't want that information at, in any case, but when we're having to put it into a complaint or a pleading, that takes attorney time and that's more money that's being
Mhm.
spent on your case. With this new law, our pleading will be fairly simple if we are filing immediately upon separation without the waiting period. It'll be a quicker process for you to get your divorce filed. Another cost saving thing that I see is that oftentimes when we're alleging fault in our initial pleadings, it gives the other side an opportunity to file these motions that contest what we're saying. So those are called pleas in bar and demurs. And honestly, I find them difficult and frustrating and a big time waste and money waste. I think we're going to see less of those types of responsive pleadings. And so I think that is going to have an effect on our clients. It will save them money that we're able to start a divorce fairly simply, and it's not going to cost a lot of time or money to get your complaint filed.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's gonna tone down the emotion, Katie, when a divorce gets started. When you file on fault, um, it ratchets up the the emotion,
Yeah.
between the couple. The other side often counterclaims and alleges a fault ground back, and that is stressful and it's emotional, and it's actually not very productive to us moving forward with a resolution. With this new law, we're able to say you're entitled to a bed and board divorce. There's no waiting period and there's no fault ground. It just, I think, is going to lower the temperature, especially at this critical stage when you are first separated.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. I definitely hope so. And just to be clear, you can still file on fault for now in Virginia if you have fault-based grounds and you want to move forward using them. So you could still elect that, avenue if you wanted to. And I always say it's a great idea to talk to an attorney, talk through strategy, and really be clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, what your objective is for going about it this way. But the objective in this case, I think, is pretty clear, is to get someone into court quickly, to get immediate relief, and to like Lorna said, to dial down the tension and hopefully keep things from becoming too nuclear. The law does specifically state that you can file for a divorce from bed and board immediately. So, in terms of setting reasonable expectations for clients and current and future clients, how immediate do you think hearings will be, Lorna? What do you think that relief will look like under these cases?
I don't think that the courts are going to be much quicker than they are now. Uh, they have every city here in Hampton Roads has different procedures for, setting hearings. There may be, an overload of court filings under this new law that the court is going to have to adjust to.
Mhm.
I doubt, I'm not sure, I don't think they're staffing more. So it realistically, when we say immediate relief, it's not immediate. We still have to work with the court schedule and timing of how soon we can get a hearing. But I will say it's a lot quicker than having to wait a full year in order to get the court's involvement. And just even starting the pleading itself is it could be helpful by starting the case. Like I said, when we file for divorce, we can send out discovery when we file. And that can be helpful. So every particular situation is different. Um, and depending on the urgency of your case, we may decide, well, we may need a protective order. It's that urgent, or we need emergency custody, or there is, or we're able to wait a few months in order to get our hearing, but we do want to file. So it's a discussion that you have to have on a case by case basis. But I think this new law just gives us another option that we didn't have before.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that brings me to the next question perfectly because I mean, I think it's a little I don't like the terminology, the divorce from bed and board, even though we always had it. You said at the beginning of our conversation, it's kind of archaic. Like this divorce from bed and board wasn't something that we were talking about a lot. It's not like in terms of having conversations with women and consultations, we were going over the differences between these two things. And I think calling it a divorce at all is really misleading because what it really is kind of a transitional step. It's more like a legal
Mhm.
separation with a few more rules. But
Correct.
do you mind
Well
explaining
said.
for everybody what the difference is from a divorce from bed and board and a divorce from the bond of matrimony, which is like full and final divorce?
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, I can say that most people have not done a divorce from bed and board, practitioners at least. I've not talked to anyone who has actually done that because most people want a divorce from the bond of matrimony, which is when you are legally free to marry someone else. You are legal strangers. You have no inheritance rights. A divorce from bed and board, under that statute, if you were to only receive a divorce from bed and board, you would still remain legally married to your spouse, and that can have all sorts of ramifications, including that you cannot get remarried to anyone else.
Mhm. Do you anticipate or hope that there will be more changes from the legislature in the coming years?
Absolutely, and what's interesting, it's already contemplated that there's going to be more changes because not only did this statute change because it says that we don't have to wait or allege fault to begin a divorce from bed and board. The statute was also specifically amended to say that the Virginia Family Law Coalition is going to convene a work group to study whether we should eliminate fault-based grounds for all divorces here in Virginia.
Mhm.
So, depending on that work study and the recommendations from there, I think it's very possible that the law will change again and fault-based grounds divorce will be eliminated entirely from the statutory framework here in Virginia. It's also possible that there will be no waiting period for a divorce from the bond of matrimony. So we'll just get rid of bed and board potentially and just do divorce from bond of matrimony. No waiting period and no fault being an option in for that type of divorce.
Yeah, I think I'm still kind of grappling with the possibility of all of these changes and what it could mean, but I do feel like the key takeaways are that most of these changes are going to be wildly positive for women because the ability to get into court, to get some relief, to kind of to keep things from going nuclear is so important, especially because for I mean, we wanna figure out the finances, we wanna figure out custody and visitation, but my first and foremost goal, especially in this transitional period, is always safety. It's a potentially really dangerous time for women. This is a lot of times where we see, like, post-separation abuse start to take shape. We see all sorts of coercive control and even more domestic violence. I mean, even for a man who maybe wasn't physically violent before, there's often a turning point where that changes. And the point where you break up or separate is one of those big moments where he realizes that he doesn't have the control that he used to have. So I love the possibility of being able to get into court quickly, to have some relief. Though I think the words are a little confusing, and we're going to have to do a lot of explaining about um,
Mhm.
a divorce from bed and board and how that isn't your full and final divorce. We're still gonna have to go through the procedural steps associated with divorce. It's not like there's some kind of different hearing or some kind of provisional status that you're going to be given. You're still gonna have a pendente lite hearing. You're still gonna go through discovery. We're still gonna, follow the procedural steps that lead up to the final divorce, which still can't be granted until you've been separated for 1 year or 6 months if you don't have any minor children and you already have a signed separation agreement. So in in a lot of ways, it'll still look and feel the same, but we have the additional opportunity of access to the court more quickly, even in no-fault cases, and the possibility that those things will, change even more in the future. To eliminate fault-based grounds would, I think I know a lot of people want to file on fault when they have fault because they were an equitable distribution state, so it's possible that the court could take into account the negative and positive monetary and non-monetary contributions of each party to the marriage in how everything is divided. But the reality in most cases is that divorce is not designed to be punitive. So, for the most part, even if he has done something really terrible, even if he has cheated on you, even if he's been abusive towards you, it's often not going to make a huge impact on how the assets are divided, if any impact at all. So
Right.
we always want to make sure that the decisions that we're making are technically sound. I usually say, like, just to be colloquial, like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are you going to get more out of this because of what you put into it? And if the answer is no, then don't put more into it, right? Don't put more into it in the terms of attorney's fees or
Mhm.
the stress that it causes you or the animosity that it creates between you and your soon to be ex, especially if you have children in common, because even after the ink is dry on your divorce from the bond of matrimony, which is the full and final divorce, you are still going to have to co parent together. So, we don't want to kind of set off some sort of nuclear bomb situation if we don't have to. And fault based divorce, like, does tend to do that. It does tend to make things worse. It tends to make things more expensive, take longer, and even give you less control over how the assets and liabilities are divided because the options are still the same. Either you negotiate an agreement or you go to court and you let the judge decide. The divorce from bed and board is just going to get you into court more quickly. It's just going to remove that waiting period before you can file. But finalizing is still going to take the full year or 6 months if you meet the other criteria. So in a lot of ways, nothing has changed, but in other ways, it's a big change because especially if you're the one who is stuck separate under the same roof with someone who is, not going to share access to the financial information, who is refusing to sign anything that you give him, who has cut you off from, access to the marital money or, the ability to take care of the kids and keep a roof over your head. So getting into court can be incredibly valuable in those cases, but it's also still going to allow for the possibility of fault and no fault divorce. It's still, for now, going to keep that waiting period in place. And we are going to have to wait and see exactly what those changes are going to look like in real practice and what is going to come down the pike, in 2027 and later as, these task forces investigate and look into possible other changes that we could implement here in Virginia. But
Mhm.
I think ultimately, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, Lorna, but I feel like it's going to be really positive, especially for women.
I think so. I think it's going to be very positive. Maybe not to the full extent that we're hoping the law will evolve, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. It will help in these initial stages when there's just a lot of high risk,
Yeah.
and emotions tend to be extremely high. I think it will help de-escalate things and also at the same time help move things forward,
Mhm.
because getting the court involved, at the end of the day, it's what you may need to have happen, and the sooner that happens, the more stability I think you can put in place for yourself and your kids.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially in high conflict cases, sometimes there is just no other option than to file with the court, and at least as an intermediate step. That doesn't mean that you won't reach an agreement later, but at least as an intermediate step to kind of give you some of the relief that you need to keep things from, becoming even more contentious as time goes
Right.
on. But keep in mind, this is all developing. This is all brand new. As of the date that we've recorded this, it hasn't even gone into effect yet. So we, like you, are going to have to wait until after July 1st to see what these cases look like and the shape that they take and the other changes that are going to potentially follow from this. So we're learning in real time as much as you are, and we're always happy to share these updates and talk about the things that are happening in the law because it has such a real impact on so many people. In the meantime, feel free to check out our website at hoflaw.com. That's HOFLAW.com. We've also got 4 free books that are still currently accurate as to the state of Virginia law, but if anything else changes, we will have to update virtually everything. But we have free reports, blogs, a divorce and a custody seminar. We also have Girls Night Out, which is our we offer them. It's kind of quarterly social events, all on the firm, where you come out, have a drink, have some appetizers, hang out with us, meet other similarly situated women, and kind of connect and network. So definitely visit the website to get more information on any of those programs or resources if they're going to be helpful to you. But thank you, Lorna, for being here. It was really helpful talking to you about the changes. I know I feel like I keep learning more about it, and I'm excited to see it in real practice. But I hope it was helpful to everyone else. And thank you so much for being here.